Economically, we are witnessing worsening conditions globally. It doesn't seem to have any sort of geographical relationship. It seems to be an issue that is widespread. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. Let's get into the big news that I consider the big news, the one that the mainstream media will never cover, and the alternative news covers very infrequently. This is the notional amount of derivatives contracts, showing you the U.S. companies holding the largest amount of derivatives. And if we look at the bottom there, I can't highlight it unfortunately, but it's over $300 trillion. $300 trillion just from the U.S. banks alone. At the top of the list, we have JP Morgan at $68 trillion, Citigroup $61 trillion, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and on and on and on. And you have these $300 trillion in paper garbage derivatives that they are going to use to hold us hostage. All of the derivatives should be wiped out. If they want to gamble and they want to have this sort of scheme that they're up to, they should do it with their own money. But this ultimately will be on the backs of the taxpayers. I talked about this before, and it's going to happen. Who is going to bail them out? And they're going to put the U.S. taxpayer on the hook for this. And this is why, and this is how they can basically have a new currency system. They will put it so indebted it can never be paid back, and they will need to create a solution. The solution is already thought about. Let's get into this right here out of Reuters. Don't vote, quote, wrong way. EU's Juncker urges. Now, don't vote the wrong way. They're saying, don't vote the way against the EU. Don't vote the way against austerity. Don't vote against increased taxation. And they're saying you must submit to what we are doing. We are the technocrats, and we will say, when we say jump, you say how high, and where I'm going with that. But essentially, this is a big problem for the EU itself. The entire structure is a failure. Let's get on with this, showing you Athens Stock Exchange, the worst 3-day decline in decades, showing you how bad the economic situation is right now. They were put through maximum austerity, and the only solution that they found was to sell off their precious assets, literally selling off islands to investors. They needed to get their money back. Greece is in a terrible situation. Unfortunately, unemployment is rampant, not just with the youth unemployment, but in all sorts of unemployment. You've seen the riots that took place, civil unrest and an upheaval, and you're seeing austerity and increased taxation upon the people that is putting a burden upon them. Let's get into this, all connected here out of the Financial Times. Watch your words or feed populism, French minister warns Germany. So they had this quote here: France's finance minister has called on the German establishment to watch its words when criticizing his country's economic policies and warning of anti-EU populists. So let's get into the actual structure of the EU itself. You have this block of countries, very diverse, and yet they are forced upon one interest rate and one currency. Then you have a set of technocrats which sit above all of them, making the decisions for all of the countries all simultaneously. It doesn't work when you have such a diverse culture. You can't make laws, you can't make rules, interest rates, and a currency all for these different countries. It can never work. That's why it's failing. It's the system itself, and the cracks have clearly appeared here, and it seems like it is falling apart. Everything is bad that could happen is happening right now. Let's go east of this right here, and we look at China, and it said it's been a bumpy ride for China's economy this year, with multiple growth scares, followed by bouts of policy stimulus. And next year, according to Goldman Sachs, they're telling investors to prepare for a moderate but choppy growth deceleration. There is the quote new normal, as they suggest, with China getting ready for less growth over time. This is supposed to be putting a little little damper on the economy because the whole global economy is failing right now. It's not just China or the US or the Federal Reserve's problem. This is a global issue that is taking place, and people are just not really looking into it enough to see how bad it really is. Let's get into oil right here, and just specifically one specific thing about it. CNBC was talking with Laszlo Birini, and he said that the oil drop is a black swan event. Now, black swan is referring to Nassim Taleb's book, The Black Swan, and he's talking about an unforeseen event. Now, most people, 99.9% of people who use this term, the Black Swan, haven't even read Nassim Taleb's book. I'll tell you right now, it is a difficult read. He's a very smart individual, and if you look into what he actually said here, the Black Swan event isn't the price drop in oil. Black Swan event is a nuclear bomb going off, and Black Swan event is the derivatives collapse. We're talking about something that doesn't happen once in 100 years. The oil price will drop up and drop down, and will rise up, and it will go crazy. This is a commodity that is relatively volatile. We've seen things happen over the years. So I'd like to come out and say right here that you need to watch out for the quotes that you see online and not take everything so closely like these individuals like to project here. This is not a black swan event. If you actually read the book, you will see that that's not the case. This right here is what I talked about in my book, talking about the oil shock of the 70s, starting in 1973-74, and then in 79, there were oil shocks of significant shortage. And we had a result, the result of which had a quadrupling of the price of oil. This is a major shock to the economy, and we see the result of that. This is obviously a big problem on the, putting a damper, putting a recession into the economy, because oil prices then make transportation more expensive and everything else. So this is one thing to watch out for, and just in general, that things can happen in a very short period of time. We can have dramatic changes in the prices of a commodity, which could then affect the entire economy as a whole. This is very important news to look out for. Oil is a very important commodity. It's not necessarily the price, just the commodity itself. It is a very, very important commodity, no doubt. Now, we have a collapse that's going on in the U.S. It's very evident. Look at Detroit. Look how bad it got right there and still is today. And then it says this, out of Bloomberg, Detroit seen as the model in Ohio City facing collapse. The council president in East Cleveland said that if she had her way, the city would follow in Detroit's path and become Ohio's first municipality to file for bankruptcy to help solve its financial woes. Just like many Americans, they are using bankruptcy as a way to get out of this. How many Americans had you heard about that literally walked away from their houses during the subprime mortgage collapse? This is what happens. People just walk away from it. What happens when the governments begin to walk away from it? Who is going to write off all of this bad debt? Who's going to write off all of the derivatives, the 300 trillion in derivatives? Nobody is going to basically be able to bail this all out. Slowly but surely it is being eroded away, and there is no solution to this. This is going to happen in so many cities around, not just the United States, but around the world, where we have them in such dire straits. Look at the conditions out there in so many of these cities. It is terrible to see. This is Justin Amash, one of the representatives in the U.S. government. This is how bad it is out there, and I just wanted to show you this specifically to explain to you that the government is creating laws which are not in your favor and in fact are in the exact opposite. When I learned that the Intelligence Authorization Act for 2015 was being rushed to the floor, there was little debate, and basically said this is one of the most egregious sections of law I've encountered during my time as a representative. Again, it grants the executive branch virtually unlimited access to the communications of every American, and they force it through. That's what happens every single time. They push this down the throats of the Congress. They cannot read it. It's impossible. Most of these bills are thousands of pages long, and they say, look, you have until 4 p.m. to read it and sign it. So this is exactly what happens. They did this with the Patriot Act. They've done this with all these sorts of different acts during the financial crisis as well, and they force these members of Congress to sign on something they literally cannot read in time. It is impossible, and this is very, very bad. The congressional staff that walked out, that is something to show you, they do care about issues. But what about this right here? Why don't they stand outside and demand change, not for the police brutality instances, but what about this? What about the fact that they're spying on every single one of your communications? What about the National Defense Authorization Act? Nothing was done about that at all. What about Fast and Furious? Knowingly shipping guns into Mexico only to have them come back in so they can be tracked and then they can be used to blame the Second Amendment. No, there's absolutely nothing to be done about that. They don't care about issues like this. They only blow up the issues that they want to. This is what we need to look at, that the government isn't there to solve our problems. As Mark Faber said, the government is there to create problems. Let's go on with this. Why more American families are going cashless. This is out of CNBC. And the reason I mention this is that we have, as the global collapse comes down, we have individuals wanting to become more sovereign. We have them wanting to protect themselves and prepare. But the government is also doing its preparations by suggesting the elimination of cash. If you can control the purchases of the people, then you can have more control over them and their personal lives. Then they can track every one of their purchases. You can lock them out if you believe that they are some sort of terrorist. No longer can they transact in between two people because they lose that paper currency, and the government will hold things, basically hold that control over them. That's what the cashless society is all about. This is taking place in other countries around the world. I believe Sweden has gone into cashless, and we're looking at a situation that, it does make sense in a way. It's, cash can be a burden at some point, but the cashless society is a very, very dangerous scenario. Cash should always be there as an option so that you and I can transact between each other and not have to worry about the government spying on us. Let's go on with the last thing here, and what this all comes down to is this article out of the New York Times, The Vanishing Male Worker, How America Fell Behind. I'm not just going to suggest that this is for the males. Let's just look into it from the example of unemployment. This is a problem that is pervasive throughout the global economy. Look at how bad it is in Greece. Look at how bad it is in Spain, in Portugal, and in the United States. You're looking at unemployment rates that are very high, but let's not even use the unemployment numbers that they provide us. Let's use the actual statistics. This individual here is able to get a job at $10 an hour, but he's saying, I can't live on $10 an hour. So he refuses and stays unemployed. Now that's his own decision to stay unemployed. But how many other people are in this same situation? And the fact remains is that there are many, many, many people in this situation not finding the work that they did simply because either automation or the offshoring of jobs. You're seeing sectors completely annihilated. You are seeing a big, big change in what used to be the powerful Western world, and is being shipped overseas at low wages to these other places like China, like India, like Brazil, where they're able to work for pennies on the dollar of what they would in the Western nations. A big problem. It can't be recovered, especially when you have trillions upon trillions upon trillions of derivatives hanging overhead. You have increased taxation, you have maximum austerity, and no way for this to return. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free, and that is available at themoneygps.com. Just scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.